Hey Mandos, what's up? So, the Book of Boba Fett, Chapter 5, The Return of the Mandalorian, is now out, and I got some words on it. First of all, I'm gonna state the obvious straight in the beginning. It is an episode of the Book of Boba Fett, but effectively, for all intents and purposes, it is just another episode of The Mandalorian. It is like an episode that, first of all, Boba Fett does not show up in this episode at all. He's only mentioned by name once at the end, and pretty much the entire episode is only focused on Din Djarin, also known as the Mandalorian, also known as a Mando. So, basically, it's just another episode of The Mandalorian, which is sort of kind of a tie-in episode in between Season 2 of The Mandalorian and Season 3 of The Mandalorian, which I liked. I actually did enjoy that concept. I would prefer it if it was just a one and done, and what I mean by one and done is, yeah, you can still have Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, show up in another episode of the Book of Boba Fett. I think there's like 3 episodes left. But yeah, you can still show up in another episode there, but just don't make an entire episode focused entirely around him again. I think that'll just be him just coming over and taking over the show. And I would much prefer it if this show remained a Boba Fett-centric show. Now, going into the episode itself, I'm a little bit conflicted on this because of what I just said, because it's my favorite episode of the Book of Boba Fett so far, personally. And yet, for some reason, it's hard for me to call it a Book of Boba Fett episode, because, like I said, it feels more like a Mandalorian episode. It doesn't really feel like a Book of Boba Fett episode. And let's just say that if both shows were running at the same time, or alternatively, if The Mandalorian would have ended years ago, the show that is, and we just got this episode now, first season of Book of Boba Fett, I feel like I would have accepted it a little bit more. It was like, oh, The Mandalorian is still out there, and this is what he's been doing since his show got cancelled. But his show didn't get cancelled. It's got another season coming up, so it feels like, I just feel it's such a Mandalorian episode. But I feel like I'm just getting myself wrapped up in all this stuff, and I think it's just making it a little too complicated for myself. Let's just talk about the episode itself. First of all, where I do feel like this episode was, in fact, a Book of Boba Fett episode specifically, is the way it was presented. And what I mean by that is that it always felt to me more like the Mandalorian episodes had a lot to do with Western-themed settings and the presentation, even going all the way to like the Gunslinger episode where we see Cobb Vanth with Boba Fett's armor. That episode is pretty much a Western in and of itself. There's also some Asian-inspired stuff in the Jedi episode where Ahsoka shows up. That episode feels like a perfect blend of samurai movie plus Western elements, and they just blend together perfectly in the Mandalorian show. The Book of Boba Fett feels to me more like a mob movie. It feels more like in the lines of The Godfather. They pretty much made a scene straight from The Godfather in last week's episode. So just Din Djarin literally stepping into a kitchen of sorts, which was sort of a front for some crime organization to pick up a bounty. That felt very much like a Book of Boba Fett episode, not so much a Mandalorian episode, despite it being entirely focused around the Mandalorian character himself. So that's where I do feel that this episode does still fall under the umbrella that is the Book of Boba Fett. Beyond that, we still get to see that Din Djarin is starting to figure out how to work his Darksaber. He doesn't have a full handle on it just yet. Going all the way to the fact that he injures himself with his own weapon while fighting, but I just love the way that he was able to pick himself back up and still continue to fight and win. And not only that, he sliced the guy up in half with the Darksaber. So clearly he has been using the Darksaber, just not, he hasn't mastered it yet. And we see that later in the episode where he's confronted by the Armorer who... And first of all, it was great to see the Armorer back. I loved seeing Paz Vizsla again. I love seeing those two characters back. It's great to see Jon Favreau playing another character in Star Wars again. But I also loved, again, the Armorers. This is where the episode kind of stops being a Book of Boba Fett episode and goes back to just being a Mandalorian episode where we see the Armorer forging some new Beskar stuff out of the spear. R.I.P. to the spear, I guess, because we're not going to see that again. But while she's forging stuff, we get to see some flashbacks. Now, obviously, there were flashbacks all over the Book of Boba Fett shows so far. In the Bacta tank, obviously, and I was worried last week, if you watched my last week's recap, that I was worried that we weren't going to see any more flashbacks to Boba Fett. We kind of did get to see that, but it wasn't Book of Boba Fett flashbacks. It was the Mandalorian flashbacks, where we get to see, just like in the Book of Boba Fett, every time the Armorer forged something out of Beskar, we got to see a little bit of an insight into the past of Mandalore, more specifically the past of Din Djarin, and we finally got to see how the Mandalorian Purge happened post Return of the Jedi, I guess. In fact, I didn't even think it was post Return of the Jedi. It might have actually been post A New Hope, I guess, or just post Rebels, because they do talk about Bo-Katan Kryze, which I loved that they brought that part up. I'm a little upset that they didn't bring up the whole Bo-Katan telling Din Djarin that the whole never take your helmet off and this is the way stuff. It was basically just a cult that the Mandalorians, or rather some Mandalorians, specifically tied to Death Watch, they made up for themselves and is no longer really the way of the Mandalorian. I was curious why he didn't bring that up, but it's great to finally get to see some context. And yes, as someone who has seen Rebels, Bo-Katan did actually accept the Darksaber as a gift from Sabine Wren, and we know what happened next, because according to, Mandalorian traditions, if the Darksaber isn't won by combat, it's won by gift. And that's one of the main criticisms that people had for the Mandalorian last year, is that he tried to offer it to her, and she already did accept it as a gift once. Why can't she do it again? And there's a look in her face that lets you know that she doesn't want that. We finally got some answers for it. We finally got the full context of it, and it's great that we did. And I love the fact that we did, which obviously then led to the Mandalorian Purge, or as they're calling it, the Night of 1,000 Tears. Then we get to see some more fighting with, or rather sparring, I should say. And there's a lot of mythological, fantastical elements in that fight. The whole part of the Darksaber getting heavier because he's resisting it. Because he refuses to fight with the blade. He's fighting the blade and not his opponent. That's some great stuff, and it really just gives a lot of context to the blade itself, and it explains why this blade is just so special among Mandalorians, and why it's so unique as opposed to most other lightsabers. And I like that. They're making this blade much more important than what we originally thought. Yeah, I just really like it. I like all the fantastical elements there. I obviously didn't think Paz Vizsla was going to win that fight and claim the Darksaber to himself. I think they still want Mando to have the Darksaber in his own show next season. I still enjoyed seeing the Amy Sedaris character. I understand this character has had a lot of criticisms from people in the Star Wars community. I liked her, but I can see where people are coming from. I can see the complaints there. I just happen to really like the character, so it is what it is. And I almost jumped out of my seat when I saw the BD-1 droid, which is obviously it's a reference to Jedi Fallen Order, which I loved. I loved the video game, and it's great that we get to see that particular model of droid in this show. I'm not sure it's the exact same BD-1 droid. I think he's still on the ship with Cal Kestis and the gang, but it's great that we see another model of that droid. Going back to the actual garage scene, it's great that we get to see that Din Djarin's got a new ship. Obviously, it's not the Razor Crest, but it's the N1 Naboo starfighter that I remember from the Phantom Menace. And I actually, that's really the first Star Wars Lego set I ever bought. The N1 starfighter. That model of ship has a special soft spot in my heart for it, but it still doesn't make sense to me that Din Djarin would use a ship like that if he's going to continue bounty hunting. And maybe he won't continue bounty hunting. Maybe he's going to just be a muscle for Boba Fett, or a muscle for hire whenever Boba Fett needs him. Maybe he's just going to completely change his ways after the next episode where he finally helps out Boba Fett. Who knows? But it's great. It was great to see Beggar's Canyon. It was great to see the pod racing area where the original pod racing from Phantom Menace happened. And I think Alex Damon from Star Wars Explained sets this up perfectly. Is that this episode is just a perfect representation of every single facet of Star Wars. We get to see, obviously, the prequels with the N1 starfighter and with the pod racing area there. We get to see the original trilogy with Mos Eisley. We get to see the animation side of it with the Darksaber, who appeared in both Clone Wars and Rebels. We get to see the video game side of it with the BD-1 droid. I also like. I get to see it's great to see that the actor that appeared in Mandalorian season 2 a lot. It's great to see him back. Which again, it's another character that was pretty much exclusive to the Mandalorian, appearing in this episode of Book of Boba Fett that's mainly centered on the Mandalorian. I liked the themes there, that the New Republic is right there, and they're not really doing anything about the Pikes because they don't really concern themselves in internal planetary politics. They're trying mostly to just maintain the peace in between planets, and planets like Tatooine that are in the outer rim. They're not really concerned. They're just concerned with like the commercial flights that Mando was flying around and could have potentially hurt someone there. So I don't know. It feels weird to me that that pilot just seems to pop up everywhere that the Mandalorian shows up, which is weird in and of itself. But also it's weird. It's weird to me that the New Republic doesn't really concern themselves with the Pikes and other crime syndicates on Tatooine. Maybe it's just the matter of they're just too scared to interfere with anything that the Pikes are doing. Which is also a possibility. There's a lot of real-world stuff in this episode, even all the way from the Mando taking the commercial flight, and there's a little kid staring at him. So there's a lot of real-world stuff, from even all the way in the kitchen scene there. So I just love that they're blending real-world stuff and stuff from movies and TV shows based in our world, in our reality, and they're basing it in the fantastical space world of Star Wars, and stuff we didn't really get to see in Star Wars in any capacity, like the commercial flight stuff and like the butcher's kitchen stuff that we didn't get to see, and like that big ring with all the alleyways on it. So a lot of really great stuff about this episode. This episode is probably the longest episode of the Book of Boba Fett so far. It's about 50 minutes, and that explains why this recap episode is maybe taking a little bit too long. But I feel like I just got really too messy with all the nostalgia bait in this episode, which I loved. I don't understand when nostalgia became a bad word for people sometimes, especially when it comes to Star Wars, but I just loved it. I ate it up. I loved seeing all the stuff from the Star Wars universe that I know. And I would much prefer if they went back and refocused the show around Boba Fett, which is supposed to be the main character of the show. And let's just save Din Djarin for his own show, which will presumably be about him trying to deliver the new chainmail Beskar stuff to Grogu, or potentially redeeming himself and making himself worthy to use the dark saber on the mines of Mandalore. Who knows where that show is going to take us? But yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. I apologize if my breakdown of this episode was a little messy because, like I said, there's so much in this episode to break down that I kind of got myself lost in the shuffle. But we only got a few more episodes left, and hopefully we get to see those episodes mainly focused on Boba Fett. I loved that Din Djarin was a one and done in this episode. Hopefully he is, and hopefully we get to see him again in another episode where the main focus is Boba Fett. And I also really liked the interaction between Boba Fett and Din Djarin in the Mandalorian show, so it'll be great to see that again. And I also really liked one final point. I loved that Din Djarin still has a certain code that he follows, like saying that whatever Boba Fett wants with him, it's on the house, or like telling the Klatooians that there's some New Republic credits there that I have no claim to. You can, if you let me leave, you can have it. You can have yourself as much as you think you deserve. I love the type of character that Din Djarin still is. Anyways, I think I'm just adding too much on this episode, too much fact on this episode that doesn't really need to be. So I'm just gonna say I really liked it, and move on. And hopefully, next week's recap episode will be much shorter because these episodes are getting longer than I would have liked them to be. Thank you for watching. If you have, let me know what you think about this episode of the Book of Boba Fett, or if you like to call it this episode of The Mandalorian, whichever one you will prefer. And until next time, I guess this is the only time I can say it, this is the way.
Hello again, everybody! I really hope you enjoyed this video, because I really enjoyed making it. So, if you like what you've seen here, please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more awesome content like this. So, until next time, guys, I'll see you guys next time.